Welcome on back to the All Aussie Rules YouTube channel. This is mid-season review time for the Essendon Bombers. We're flying through the mid-season buys for each team, and as each team gets there, we are doing a mid-season review for each of them. So we run through their season so far, have a look at all their matches they've played, how they've gone. We have a little quick wrap-up of each player, and we have a look at what they have to come in the remaining part of the 2024 season and what we expect from them in the remaining part of 2024. Before we jump into all of that, as always, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Check out all the social medias. We've got Twitter, we've got Instagram, we've got Facebook, we've got TikTok. We've got them all. So go check them out. Also, while I've got you here, let's have a look at this week's schedule. As always, going live on Spotify and YouTube. The review episode from round 13 went live on Monday at 8 p.m-ish. And then the round 14 preview episode, also on Spotify and this very YouTube channel, is the round 14 preview episode. That's now going live on Fridays instead of Thursdays, due to the fact that there's no more Thursday night footy. So yes, that will be there. This week we've got 6 mid-season reviews going live. Carlton already would have gone live a few hours ago. This one's the Essendon one. Tomorrow we got Geelong and Melbourne, and then on Thursday we got West Coast and Gold Coast going live. There's also plenty of others already gone live from previous weeks, so go back and check them out. And there's 6 more to go live next week during the week, for the remaining teams to have the buys. But that's everything we have to say, I think. So let's jump straight into the review. Oh, I just clicked the same thing. There we go. This is the Bombers season so far. They started in round 1. They had, obviously, week 1, the opening round they had off. Week 1 they played the Hawks at the MCG. This was, I won't say the prettiest game of football you'll ever see. But the Bombers got the 24-point win. It was a great start to their season. I don't think they were dominant in any stretch of the imagination. Hawthorn had their chances and wasted them. Kicked very poorly in front of goal, did the Hawks. Meanwhile, the Bombers kicked very straight. They kicked 17-5 for the day. So they took their chances. Hawthorn didn't. Bombers got the points. Week 2, they went up to the SCG. They played the Swans, and to be honest, it's probably one of the best performances of any team at the SCG this year against Sydney. They lost by 30 points. It was a high-scoring game, 101 to 131. Sydney had their measure the whole day, basically, but it was still a competitive performance from the Bombers. It was, as I said, one of the better performances anyone's put up against the Swans, full stop, but especially at the SCG. Round 3 was against St Kilda. Saturday afternoon game. First half, Bombers were pretty average, to be honest. They fought their way back into it in the second half and ended up winning, but I don't think it was the greatest performance from them. But they got the points, and once again, that's all that matters. They were 2-1 at this point. Round 4 was gather round. They had kind of the short straw here. They had to play Port Adelaide in gather round over in Adelaide, but that's neither here nor there. It was an absolute demolition job by Port Adelaide. Port Adelaide won this by 69. It was close in the first quarter, 21 to 24, I think. But from that point onwards, it was one-way traffic, and Port Adelaide won this one convincingly. Round 5, they had the Bulldogs, and they won this by 29 points. It was, to this point, their best performance of the year. It was a complete performance. Their first couple wins were certainly helped by inaccuracy or just the other team being terrible. This one, they played really well. They got the job done. Bulldogs didn't show up that day at all, but the Bombers certainly did, and they got the win. The week after that, they went to Adelaide Oval. They tried their very best to lose this one. They were quite clearly the better team all day. They kicked 10 goals, 18, which isn't fantastic. They were winning comfortably there at one point. Adelaide fought their way into it, especially late. Controversial free kick there towards the end that didn't get paid to Adelaide. That would have given them a shot at goal. But overall, Essendon were the better team, probably deserved the win. Just needed to tidy up their kicking at goal, really. Round 7 was the Anzac Day clash against Collingwood. This was a draw. Both teams probably think they had their chances. Essendon certainly came out of the blocks really well. Had a really good first quarter. Collingwood got back onto level peggings by half time, and the third and fourth quarters were just arm wrestles both ways. In the end, ends up draw. Probably can't argue with that result for either team, really. Both teams wasted chances. Both teams had their opportunities. So, in the end, it was a draw. Round 8, they went over to the West, Optus Stadium, to play West Coast. This was I won't say a comfortable win because they only won by 6 points, but they looked in control for certainly most of the first half. The Eagles came back a little bit in that second half and gave themselves an opportunity, but in the end, the Bombers held on for a good win over in the West. West Coast are certainly a better team over there than they are anywhere else. GWS at Marvel Stadium. This was a Saturday afternoon game. It was one where in the first half I thought it was going to be a GWS win. GWS looked right on top in that first half. Mainly led by Jesse Hogan was clunking them. Their whole team looked up and about, but third and fourth quarters were dominated by the Bombers. They ended up winning the match by 20 points, which is a solid win. Just were the better team in the second half for sure. Round 10 was against North Melbourne. They did what they needed to. They won this one by 40 points. The first quarter was good. Second quarter they actually lost, but in the fourth quarter they lost as well. So they dominated the third quarter, which blew it out a bit, but I don't think they were in any real danger at any point of this match. They then had Richmond on the Saturday night at the MCG for Dreamtime at the G. Richmond put up a fight this week. The 2 previous weeks, Richmond had been absolutely smacked, but this was a 12-point win to Essendon. Wasn't the most outstanding performance, but Richmond did show up that day. Essendon got the job done. They played solid football without being outstanding, which is probably sums up most of their season so far. But they're getting results, and that's all you can do at the end of the day. Round 12, they went up to the Gold Coast. This was a tightly fought game. Both teams had their chances. The people argue about the umpiring decisions. I don't think they were that bad. In the end, Gold Coast won it by 11 points, and Bombers, they were probably kicking themselves. They had an opportunity to win this one, but they couldn't do it in the end. And I mean, Gold Coast are a good team at home. They haven't lost at home yet this year. So we'll see what that means going forward, but I wouldn't read too much into that result. They then, round 13 on Sunday night, just been, they played Carlton at the MCG. This was a game that was dominated by Carlton, especially first half-wise on the scoreboard. Bombers had their chances. They wasted them, to be honest. They went forward a lot, but just couldn't get that into converting into shots on goal / scoreboard pressure. Parts of their game was really good, but at the end of the day, 9 goals, 16, and you lose by 26 points is pretty much sums up the day for them. I think they had their opportunities, but they didn't take them, and that cost them. It's kind of the way of the AFL, maybe forever, but certainly this year. If you waste your opportunities, you're going to have a hard time winning the game. Too many teams are too close together in competitiveness that if you waste your chances, you're going to get found out in that regard. We'll have a look at some of the stats for the Bombers for the season so far. Overall, their first quarters are probably their best quarters. They're 8 wins, 4 losses and a draw in the first quarters. Second quarters, they kind of struggle a little bit, just 5 and 8. Half time, they're 7 and 6, so solid first halves. Overall, they're down by 3.8 points per half in the first half. That's mainly affected by the fact that they were 35 points down on Port Adelaide and 32 points down on Carlton on the weekend. Second halves, they're overall a lot better. They're plus 4 points per quarter, per half, sorry, led mainly by the fact that they smoked North Melbourne by 32 points and Richmond by 33 points in the second half. But overall, they're pretty consistent throughout the game, but their first quarters are the standout quarters for them. They play a high disposal game. Most weeks they will lead the disposal count. There's only been 2 weeks that they haven't. All 3. One they levelled with Gold Coast, and then they lost the disposal count by 2 to North Melbourne and 3 to the Bulldogs. So they do play that high disposal game, especially in the handball facet. They're plus 14.5 handballs per game compared to their opposition. Inside 50s is an interesting story for the Bombers. This is probably where they really turned it around after 5 weeks. First 5 rounds they were minus 5.6 per game, which is not ideal, but they were winning games. But as I said when we ran through them before, the Hawthorn St Kilda wins weren't outstanding. The Bulldogs one was pretty good, but they were getting beaten in that area. Since then they've completely turned it around. They've gone plus 14 inside 50s per game since that point, and they've won each and every one of those 8 rounds, with the only ones being close were the Collingwood one where they were plus 2 and the Gold Coast one where they were plus 4. Every other game has been quite a domination in that facet for them. Disposal efficiency, if you take out the game against Port Adelaide where they were absolutely smacked in this area, they're really good. They're consistent. They beat their opponents in efficiency disposal wise most weeks. It's just that one bad game kind of gets them back to almost level. They're still slightly up, but not by much. Forward efficiency is probably one of the areas that they don't excel in. They get the ball forward plenty, as we went through. They're plus a lot lately, plus 14 per game in the last 8 weeks. But their their forward efficiency, so that's their ability to score from inside 50s, is quite low. They had a good week against Gold Coast a couple of weeks ago in that facet, but that's really the only highlight they've had in that area in the last 8 weeks or so. They were average against Collingwood, and they were average against West Coast, but got the job done in that game. And they were really poor at it against Carlton. Well, they were okay, but they're defending the forward, so their defensive efficiency, I guess, was really poor that day. What else is of note for the Bombers? I just dropped me notes, but that's okay. Clearances. They started the season really well in this. Rounds 1 to 8, they were plus 5 per game, winning 7 out of the 8 clearance matchups. Since then, though, it's pretty much reversed. They're minus 5.8 per game since that, and 1 and 4 at winning the clearance game, and that only win in clearances was against the Gold Coast. Centre clearances is probably a lot different in terms of they were really bad against Port Adelaide. They were really good against Collingwood, and outside of that, they're not too far off the pace most weeks. Certainly their numbers at the start of the season were better than what they were over the last 4 or so weeks, but it's not much of a difference in centre clearances. It's plus 2 or minus 3. So slight disadvantage there, but not much really in the grand scheme of things. However, stoppage clearances around the ground, this is probably where they're at their worst. You look at it, rounds 1 to 8, they were plus 2.6 per game, so pretty solid. A couple blemishes, but only small blemishes in that time. No, just one blemish. That was against St Kilda, minus 1. There was a couple they drew, Hawthorn and Bulldogs. The rest of the first 8 weeks, they were really good. Since that point, they're minus 4.4 stoppage clearances per game and haven't won any of the 5 weeks. They went minus 11 against North Melbourne, they went minus 7 against Richmond, and they went minus 3 against Carlton. So the clearance game has certainly dropped off. Is that the end of the world? Not really. Their results still say that they're going well, and to be honest, some of their better wins were in that time. Like GWS was a great win. They lost clearances only by one that day, but they still lost it. So that's nothing to be majorly concerned about. Contested footy, they're pretty good at it overall. They had a -15 against Carlton this week, which kind of ruined their numbers a bit, but overall they're still pretty high in this regard. They were really good against Collingwood +22. They were really good against North Melbourne +14. And against St Kilda, it's probably where they won the game against St Kilda. They were +13 in that regard. Uncontested footy, typically they win it every week. They're 9-3 for the year. Interestingly, that the 3 times they've lost it quite convincingly, but they won those 3 matches. So they were against the Bulldogs, North Melbourne and Richmond, which kind of tells me that maybe they don't, they overpossess it sometimes, and when they don't overpossess it, they probably play better football. But that's maybe overreading it a little bit, I don't know. Turnover game, they're really good at. You take out the first few weeks, they were okay at it. The last 6 weeks they've been outstanding. So the first 7 weeks they won the turnover game 3 out of those 7 games, and overall were -2.7 turnovers per game, so not great in their first 7 weeks. In the last 6 weeks, however, though, they've won the turnover game each of those 6 weeks, which is really quite impressive. +9.2 per game in those games as well. So they're led by +13 in the turnover game against North Melbourne and Carlton, +11 against West Coast, +7 against GWS, +10 against Richmond. So they've been really good. And if you go back 2 more weeks, they were really good against Adelaide in that facet as well. The only blemish in the last 8 weeks was against Collingwood in that regard, who I think are ranked number 1 or 2 in the AFL for turnovers throughout the season. So, they've been really good at that over the last 6 weeks especially. So they're +2.9 per game for the year, but as I said, over the last 6 weeks, +9.2. So that's an area of the game that they've really turned around and really looking to improve, I think. It's really benefited them in that regard. Last stat that we typically look at here is the tackles per game. We look at it in comparison to their opposition. So a high tackle number doesn't necessarily mean much if the other team's tackling more than you. Overall, they're pretty good at this. They're +8 per game, which has them sitting third. Their last 4 weeks, they've dominated it. And if you go 6 weeks, they've won them all convincingly, except for the game against GWS. They tackle really hard. They tackle really well in the forward 50 as well. They get a lot of them. The only game that they really didn't win the tackles inside 50 count was against Collingwood in round 7 when they were -12. But outside of that, they've been really good at the tackle game. As I said, they are third. I mean, that's behind Collingwood and Sydney, the only teams that tackle comparatively to their opposition better. A look at some of the players, I think. A look at Langford, we'll start with. He's been really good as a forward this year. He's kicked 28 goals. He's, in my opinion, probably the best leading tall forward in the game. Gives them a very good option. Probably not enough other options for them at the moment, but he is a lead-up forward, is very good. Zach Merritt's obviously their best player. I think there's no arguing that. He's probably top 5 player in the AFL at the moment. He's been very good again this year. He's the only one on their team that really is great in the centre clearances. The rest of the team kind of struggle, and he's very good at it. Side note, maybe I'd like to see Stringer get in there a bit more often, because he does kind of do really well in the centre clearances for the team. So it wouldn't be bad, I think, if they could get him up there and up the ground a bit more often. Mackay, I think, has been a massive in in the back line. He's been huge for them. I think it just adds a little bit of, well, it obviously adds height, but it just gives a little bit more composure around him as well, because it allows the other players in that back line to maybe be a bit more attacking, because Mackay obviously doesn't worry too much about the attacking stuff. He's just fully there to lock down, which allows your Martins and your other players to get the more run off and get the ball going forward. Speaking of Martin, he's been very good this year. He's moved more to a defensive role, but still attacking. He was on the wing obviously before. He's getting 5 more disposals per game, which, yes, they are uncontested, but they're very good. He's got a little bit of criticism over the last couple of weeks for his maybe efficiency and turning it over and such, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. He's winning the ball. He's kicking goals as well. For a running back is very handy. So I think that's a big positive for him and for the team. We'll have a look now at what they have going forward for the rest of the season. So they have the bye obviously in round 14. Round 15 they're going up against West Coast at Marvel Stadium. They obviously only just played West Coast over in the West. They won it over there, so you'd assume that they should win that one in round 15. They then have Geelong at the MCG. That should be a good game. I think both teams are probably going to be similar spot on the ladder at that point. Big match for both teams. Round 17 they go up against Collingwood. Obviously they drew with them this year, so who gets the points in this one will be also fascinating. They then have a round 18 game against Melbourne to wrap up 3 games in a row at the MCG. Should be, who knows what Melbourne will show up, to be honest. Melbourne of a few weeks ago, would be a really good game. Melbourne of last weekend, round 12, really wouldn't be great at all. Adelaide at Marvel Stadium, obviously they just got over the line over in Adelaide, so you'd have them as favourites in that at the moment, and I don't think there's any arguing there. They then play St Kilda at Marvel Stadium, which I think once again they'll probably go into that as favourites, having beaten them already this year, and certainly higher on the ladder at the moment, and I'd imagine they still will be at that point. It would be shocking to see St Kilda above Essendon after round 20. Round 21 they have Fremantle at the MCG. You just have to think that they're going to beat Fremantle. However, Fremantle have travelled to Melbourne very well this year. They're 3-0 in Melbourne, so maybe it won't be as easy as perhaps some think. They then play Gold Coast at Marvel Stadium. Obviously, they only just played them 2 weeks ago. Up on the Gold Coast, they gave them a run for their money. Gold Coast don't travel very well, so you'd imagine Essendon will go into that as favourites. They play Sydney in round 23, which could be a blockbuster game. Sydney are probably going to have top 2 wrapped up by this point, maybe even top 1. Essendon potentially could be fighting for a top 4 spot, and even if things go pretty bad for them, they'll still be fighting for a top 8 spot at this point, I'd imagine. So they're going to have everything on the line. It's at Marvel Stadium. Sydney probably don't play Marvel Stadium as well as they play other grounds. I think even MCG they play better than Marvel typically. There are a couple games at Marvel over the last few weeks. While Sydney have won them, they haven't been great. And then round 24, the only time for the rest of the season that they leave Melbourne is to go to Brisbane at the Gabba. Who knows where Brisbane will be at this point. Brisbane's best over the next 6 or 7 weeks could have them fighting for a top 8 spot. But if they continue on the way they have been, their season will probably be over, and who knows what Brisbane will come out that day. So it could go either way. But yeah, that's the remaining fixture for Essendon. Not the toughest run home. Obviously, a lot of games in Melbourne. They've got a tough one against Sydney, the top team. Outside of that, they do play a few top 8 teams and teams in contention. Geelong, Collingwood, Melbourne, Fremantle, maybe Gold Coast. But they also have a couple easier games. West Coast in Melbourne should be should be comfortable. Adelaide in Melbourne, St Kilda shouldn't be too tough. So certainly some winnable games for them going forward. Obviously, I think, what are they? 8.5 wins at the moment. Going forward, the easy games, I said there's probably 3 or 4 there that gets them to 11.5, 12 wins roughly. And then, so they need to win probably two more of the games against either Geelong, Collingwood, Melbourne, Fremantle, and Brisbane, or Sydney. Sorry. So definitely should be making top 8 from this position. Obviously, last year they were, after round 15, in the top 5. I think they were still in the 8 after round 17, and then just fell apart with injuries and such. So there's every chance that, like, as with every team, if injuries hit in the wrong way with crucial players, it could blow your season apart. But from where they're at the moment, you'd certainly expect that they'll be top 8. Potentially, if they get on a really good run, if they get West Coast, beat Geelong, Collingwood, all of a sudden they are looking at a potential top 4 spot. The last few weeks will be tough. Sydney, Brisbane, tough finish, but their season's going really well, so I wouldn't be surprised to see them either finishing 5-6 or maybe pushing to the bottom rungs of the top 4. But that's Essendon Football Club. I think whatever they do this season, they'll be better for it next season. But that's everything I have to say about the Bombers. As always, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Let me know what you think of the Bombers season so far. Are they really a top 4 contender? Let me know. But thanks anyway, and catch us next time.